You are tapped in with Caden. In this video, we will discuss reasons why Turki Alalshikh's and Dana White's boxing league will fail. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not rooting against them, but there are obvious hurdles they would have to clear in order for this league to be successful, and that is what we are going to discuss in this video. The first reason why the league will fail is the Ali Act. Now, the Ali Act is a law that was passed by Congress to protect boxers. Now, it doesn't apply to mixed martial arts, which is the sport in which Dana White excels, and he built a successful brand, but he's going to run into hurdles trying to duplicate that success in boxing, and one of the main reasons is the Ali Act. Now, let's take a look at what Eddie Hearn had to say when he was asked about trying to create a league when the Ali Act exists to prevent boxing organizations from having successful boxing leagues. Now, this video appears courtesy of Boxing News. Subscribe to Boxing News for some of the best interviews in the sport of boxing. Let's take a listen.
I want to get your thoughts on the Ali Act. It goes against the creation of boxing leagues and organizations trying to dominate the sport for protection of fighters. Is that an obstacle which can't be overcome?
I don't know. Sometimes these acts run the course of time and dissolve. The UFC obviously has a model where it does control the commercial interests of a fighter, and you essentially get told who you're going to fight. And I think a league structure is the same kind of thing in the sense of you sign up for this and you fight who they tell you to fight. Boxing's not as easy as that, if I'm honest. You have advisors, you have managers, you have trainers that are very vocal in terms of the route and strategy. But a lot of that is solved by money. This whole sort of one champion, one belt, this kind of stuff. The reality is that's been talked about for years and years. You can't underestimate the value of the other belts to fighters and the legacy that it creates. But with huge financial investment, anything is possible, especially when you've got guys like Dana and TKO. And I think it's exciting. I think everybody's talking about boxing. We're seeing bigger ticket sales than ever, better ratings than ever globally. And I think it's a great time for the sport.
Just quickly ask Eddie.
All right. Now, you heard him. With big money, all these things are possible. But if you know, or if you've been around combat sports and you're familiar with how fighters get paid, you know that boxers get paid a lot more than UFC fighters. And Dana White has been losing some of his biggest talent to the sport of boxing. And that's one of the main reasons why I think Dana White is interested in getting involved with boxing and trying to bring his UFC model to the sport of boxing, because he lost Conor McGregor to boxing. Conor McGregor fought Floyd Money Mayweather, and he made the most amount of money he's ever made in his entire career. Then you had Francis Ngannou, who went over to boxing, fought Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, and made the most money he earned in his entire career in those fights. So boxing is a huge threat to MMA because of the amount of money that the fighters can generate. Now, the difference in pay stems from the benefits that boxers and the protections that boxers have due to the Ali Act. So this video was made by TJ Loves Fights, and it was made 2 years ago, and it has 1.3 million views. I'm showing this video as a form of fair use. I'm reacting to what was said in this video based on what's taking place today, currently in 2025. Now, I have to state that for YouTube purposes. But you should subscribe to TJ Loves Fights. He did a great job breaking this down. Now, you heard what Eddie Hearn said. Anything's possible when you have the money and you can pay fighters. They don't want to continue to overpay fighters because that's unsustainable. They will continue to lose profits. And at some point, you want your business to be profitable the way UFC is profitable. But this video is going to break down. And this is, again, TJ Loves Fights on YouTube. Subscribe to TJ Loves Fights. Made a great video, so I don't want to reinvent the wheel when someone's already done it brilliantly. And the title of the video from TJ Loves Fights is Why Boxing Stars Make So Much Money and Why UFC Stars Don't. And you're going to see the main reason why boxers make more money is the protections they are afforded under the Ali Act. Now, let's take a look at this video.
The stars in boxing make an absurd amount of money, while the UFC stars do not. So take a couple Saturdays ago on August 20th, when UFC 278, headlined by Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards, happened on the same day as Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk 2. Kamaru Usman made $750,000 with a $42,000 sponsorship bonus, while Leon Edwards made $400,000 with an additional $100,000 for the win. And
just take a look at that. Both fighters made under $1 million. Under $1 million, both fighters, even with bonuses and sponsorship deals.
$32,000 for a sponsorship bonus. Leon Edwards also made an additional $50,000 for his performance of the night when he KO'd Kamaru Usman late in the 5th round. Now, if we go back to the boxing event that took place this day, Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk split a fight purse of $150 million, and that was just the guaranteed fight purse. This doesn't include any sponsors.
So you're talking about $75 million apiece. $75 million. AJ and Usyk split. And then their teams, their promoters, their management companies, all they get a percentage of that, but they took home $75 million to split. The amount of money they made in comparison to Leon Edwards and Usman is just astronomical. It's outright criminal. It's downright criminal. And this video is going to break down some more things. I want to give TJ Love Fights his props. He did a great job with this video. So we're going to continue. Let's watch.
Sponsorships or any of the undisclosed pay-per-view money that they would both split at the end of this night. So if you've been a fan of combat sports, this is nothing new. The pay disparity between the stars in the UFC and the stars in boxing is outstanding.
The pay disparity, the difference. Now, we're going to take a look at it right here, side by side, real quick. You just see Triple G, 25 million. Anthony Joshua, 39 million. Canelo, 44,500,000. Floyd Mayweather, 285 million. And Daniel Cormier, 1.8. So $1,820,000. Hunt, $2,295,000. Right? And McGregor, one of the biggest stars in the history of UFC, arguably the biggest star UFC has ever had. At the time, his earnings were $3,030,000. So you see the huge pay discrepancy, and you just saw what Leon Edwards and Usman made in comparison to Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk for their rematch. But let's continue with this.
Is there such a huge disparity between the fight purses of stars in boxing and the fight purses of the stars in the UFC? So before I get into the explanation of why the stars in boxing get paid much more than the stars in the UFC, we have to specify that we're only talking about the stars here. We're not going to be talking about the average boxer, as the average boxer makes much less than the average UFC fighter. So this brings...
Now I want to bring that back. One benefit of the league is that the average UFC fighter makes more money than the average boxer. So if you're an average fighter in the UFC, then you make more money being average than you would if you were a boxer. So you see here, the average professional boxer can make between $22,000 to $37,000 a year, according to combat sports events. Now, you got to remember, boxing has a wide range. There are more boxers. There are bill fillers. They're those guys who fight 4-rounders. You've seen them, and they have like 160 fights, and they lost 130 of them. And then there's a wide range. But if you make it to the UFC, you're already perceived as one of the best in mixed martial arts. So just making it to the league already gets you to a certain level or a certain level of respect. But even still, look at how much the average UFC fighter makes. The average UFC fighter makes $160,022, and that was in 2021. You can get a lot. I know personally, I'm not going to put my findings out there. Let's just say that you couldn't offer me that money. If you offered me that money for a job, I would reject it. So just think about that. for a second. Like, it's not as all the fighters aren't making as much money as some people perceive, but still, that's one point you want to give to UFC. You want to give it to UFC that the average fighter makes more than the average boxer, but we're talking about superstar level. You see, they're oceans apart.
Much less than the average UFC fighter. So this brings us to the reason as to why the stars in boxing make much more money than the stars in the UFC. It's simply due to how each sport is structured. So if you're a returning viewer of mine, you've probably heard me say that the sport of boxing is messy. There's multiple promotions, there's multiple belt organizations, and most importantly, there is no one governing body. So in the sport of MMA, it's a little different because there really is only one governing body, the UFC. And yes, I know there are other promotions such as Bellator, but the UFC owns 80 to 90% of the market share in the Western Hemisphere. And then when it comes to the Eastern Hemisphere, ONE FC does own 80% of that, but they've reported tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars of losses each year. There practically is no competition for the UFC, and there actually has been lawsuits against the UFC claiming that they are a monopoly, and it's very hard to see them as otherwise. So in boxing, I like to see it as a free market. There are multiple promotions, and it's very, very competitive. Now, this gives a boxer a lot of freedom in terms of negotiating contracts and getting competitive pay. I mean, if they're not happy with the pay they're getting at one promotion, they can easily jump ship to another promotion and get better pay. Now, in terms of the MMA, there really is only one promotion, the UFC. So it's really hard to negotiate a contract or seek competitive pay because there are no competitors. So to really demonstrate how the structure...
Now, before we get into it, this is going to be a huge issue, again, with a boxing league being started by Dana White and Turki Alalshikh, because UFC is going to be one promotional company. If Top Rank, PBC, Matchroom, and Golden Boy, and they don't even have Queensberry Promotions in this video, but Queensberry's is another major player. Now, UFC could build a star. Let's say they built a superstar from the ground up. Let's say they built the next Bones Jones, Conor McGregor, Anthony Joshua, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo from the ground up. And that fighter fought in their boxing league, and they had their boxing league, and then there was there was just boxing. Let's say Top Rank, PBC, Matchroom, the old school promoters represent boxing the way it currently is, and then they create TKO Boxing League, right? And TKO Boxing League wants to be its own entity where it's its own league. They have its own belt, which would be, I guess, the Ring Magazine belt and whatever belt they create. And those are their belts. But the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO still exist, and those organizations only work with the traditional boxing promoters, Top Rank, PBC, Matchroom, Golden Boy, Queensberry, etc. Once UFC spends all this money building a superstar up, and that superstar is seen as the best in their division, we'll just say heavyweight. This fighter is seen as the best heavyweight in his division. Once that fighter gets sick of the restrictions that are placed on them under UFC, they would just be able to go to one of the traditional boxing promoters and then fight for the belts of the sanctioning bodies that always existed in the sport of boxing. Now, you can't stop that under the Ali Act, where UFC, as this video points out, they have a monopoly. UFC is basically seen as MMA. Some people don't even know that other MMA organizations exist. Like, UFC is viewed as MMA, and they basically are one and the same to people. If you fight in another league, no one's going to give you the respect. So UFC has a monopoly on mixed martial arts that they won't have on boxing, and that realistically they will never have on boxing. And that's a huge problem for UFC. So they won't be able to restrict the superstars the way they can in mixed martial arts in boxing, and that's because of the Ali Act. And we'll get into that in this video. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to highlight that because that's going to be a huge hurdle for them.
Of each sport impacts the stars' fight purses. Let's take two events from each respective sport take the revenue from each event and compare it between the two and see how the money is divided. And to really showcase the insane disparity between the fight purses of the stars in the UFC and the stars in boxing, I decided to pick an event in the UFC that made more money than an event in boxing. But despite this, the stars in the UFC in that event made less money than the stars in the event in boxing. So take UFC 196, which was headlined by Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 1. This made $80 million in total revenue. So this is pay-per-view buys, ticket sales, and everything in between. And for boxing, let's take Anthony Joshua versus Vladimir Klitschko, which made $68 million. And looking at the fight purses, Nate Diaz made $620,000, while Conor McGregor made the first $1 million fight purse in the UFC. Meanwhile, Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko split a purse of 30 million pounds, so each of them got around 15 million pounds or 17 million US dollars.
Think about that. McGregor Diaz generated more money than Joshua Klitschko, almost 20 million more, right? McGregor Diaz generated 80 million. Joshua Klitschko generated upwards of 60 million, and Joshua and Klitschko split 15 million pounds apiece. But Conor McGregor got the first $1 million purse in the history of UFC, which was in 2014, which is just sad. And Diaz didn't even see $1 million, but they generated much more. And all that revenue goes to UFC. The biggest chunk of the pot goes to the organization in the league, UFC, whereas the fighters are the brand. The fighters, their name, their recognition, they get what they generate. They are the superstars, and that's the difference. UFC is bigger than the brand. UFC 357. The fighters are just, this is UFC 196. That's what you see. UFC 196, that's what's highlighted. It's on, and then you see McGregor Diaz and everyone else. Nothing above the brand. And Joshua Klitschko, you see Joshua and Klitschko. They are what's selling. And realistically, the fight only did well because of McGregor and Diaz. But again, UFC over everything. And UFC is basically robbing their fighters blind. But we'll continue with this video, and then I'll get into it a bit more. But I want you to see the difference. And like, I don't like addressing, like, there are people, because I made a video about Turkey and Dana starting the league. It's actually my most recent video before this one was posted. You can check it out. But there are people in the comment section, like, I really want to ask them, but I'm going to keep it classy. But the way they attack you when you point things out, yeah, they're divas in the sport of boxing. Absolutely. There are some people in the sport of boxing who want to get paid for cherry picking. But then you have people who will fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, like Alexander Usyk, like Anthony Joshua. You have those fighters like Dmitry Bivol, like Artur Beterbiev. You have the guys who want to give us the fights we want to see. They just want fair compensation. Those guys don't deserve to be fighting in a boxing league that's going to give them less than 1% of what they generate. They generate 80 million and they're going to take home a $1 million purse. That to me is robbed. There's no way you can justify Conor McGregor only taking home $1 million. And again, after tax and paying his trainers and physiotherapists, how much money did he really take home? My point is, there's no way you can justify that. So for everyone who wants to act like all boxers aren't divas, so to make the people who want to sit there and do that shows a lack of knowledge of the sport. Yeah, there are guys who want to get paid for cherry picking, but you can't place that on, you can't place that narrative on every fighter, because it's just not true. But we'll continue with the explanation as to why Diaz and McGregor got such a small percentage of the revenue they generated, and they generated more money than Joshua Klitschko.
Despite the UFC event making $12 million more than the boxing event, the stars in the boxing event were paid $14 million or more than the stars in the UFC event. So Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz only took home around 2% of the total revenue made in UFC 196. Meanwhile, Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko damn near took half of the revenue that was made up in their event. And these percentages are not just specific to these events alone. The UFC typically pays their fighters around 16% of the total revenue, while other leagues such as the NFL or even Bellator and boxing with no league pays their fighters around 40 to 50% of the total revenue.
So think about this. The NFL, 48%, shares 48% of the revenue with their athletes. Bellator, the other MMA league that doesn't get as much respect as UFC, pays their fighters 44.7%. And the UFC only pays their fighters 16%. I'm willing to bet UFC pays their athletes the least amount of the revenue that they generate out of every sport that exists. And that's insane. So there's one thing to say, oh, the fighters and the divas and this, but this is highway robbery. This is why Conor McGregor wants out of UFC. This is why Francis Ngannou wants out of UFC. When they see how much money they generate and how much is actually going into their pockets. And you heard even boxing pays their fighters over 40% of the revenue they generate of the revenue that they generate, which is in line with what the NFL does, a sport with a commission, and they don't need a league. If anything's broken, if you really want to be real, is what's broken boxing, or is UFC what's really broken? UFC doesn't even pay their fighters 20%. Most decent people tip 20% when you go out. If they paid them tip wages, their fighters would be getting paid more. So this is something you have to take into consideration when you sit there and you try to talk. Basically, what you're really saying is you just want to see people beat each other's heads in and earn nothing for what they generate. You don't want them to earn a decent wage. So boxing is actually more in line with the other sports that have commissions, like the NFL and the NBA. And UFC is robbing their fighters blind. And here's the actual numbers right there. So we'll continue and we'll go on.
So as you can see, the structure of each sport drastically changes how much the stars in each event make in their fight purses. So in the MMA, the UFC is essentially the league, and Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor are simply just employees or players within the league. So they're inclined to only as much money the UFC wants to give them, and the UFC is going to take a majority of the money that was made through that event and bring it back into the brand and bring it back to the league. Meanwhile, in our boxing event, Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko are kind of like they're two separate companies coming together to merge for this event. They're the ones who made this event, and thus they have no one to answer to. They made this event, so they deserve a majority of that money. I know there's promoters and managers and broadcasters that these boxers have to hire, but essentially they were the draws to this event. And Georges St. Pierre, a personal favorite UFC fighter of mine and one of the greatest of all time, perfectly describes this in this Joe Rogan clip.
If you look at the UFC, for example, look at UFC, the way they promote the event. UFC is like the Vaseline of petrol jelly.
Right.
People don't say, hey, I watch mixed martial art. They say, I watch UFC.
Right.
So the way they promote it, it's UFC 226, this guy versus this guy on the bottom, but they promote the UFC. Right. They don't promote the fighter. They promote mostly the brand. And it's very smart because that they have the monopoly over the others, right?
Right.
Which in boxing, they build up their fighter because the money is on the fighter. It's not on the IBF title, or yes, it's IBF title, but it's
people don't care.
Canelo versus Mayweather. Right. And then on the bottom, for what they're fighting for.
Right.
Which in the UFC is the opposite.
Yeah.
So besides the major difference in how the money is split up in each sports event, there is also the opportunity for a boxer to make hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars from sponsorships, something that the UFC stars do not have. On boxing, you've probably noticed that the biggest stars wear some of the biggest brands on their shorts.
You see that right there. Look at Manny Pacquiao shorts. Manny Pacquiao is sponsored by Fashion Nova, Puro, and just a lot of sponsorships on the shorts. Even it's a photo of Manny Pacquiao when he fought Keith one-time Thurman, and even Keith Thurman has Fashion Nova on his shorts. And those opportunities aren't afforded to MMA fighters because the sponsorships have to go directly to the league. So the league, the sponsor, if you want to sponsor the best way to put it is, if you want an MMA fighter to wear your brand on the MMA fighter shorts, you have to go to the UFC and sponsor the UFC, and then the UFC will tell the fighters they have to wear it, even if the fighters don't want to wear it because the sponsor isn't paying them directly. Let's let the video continue.
From Dolce & Gabbana, Hublot, and Christian Dior, I would assume that these sponsorship deals are worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. Meanwhile, in the UFC, Dana White made one of the most outrageous and infamous deals, simply known as the Reebok deal. This deal made Reebok essentially the sole sponsor of UFC gear, so UFC fighters could no longer take sponsorships to wear on their pants or any of their gear. This reportedly made UFC fighters lose out on hundreds of thousands of dollars and completely removes the opportunity for UFC fighters to make more money outside of just their fight purse. Now today, Venom is the sole sponsor of the UFC, and they do offer sponsorship bonuses, but they only cap out to $42,000, and you still cannot have any other sponsorship on your gear besides Venom. So again, because the UFC is the controlling league and the UFC fighters are simply just their employees, they really have no say in this, and they have to follow this Reebok deal. So another thing that boxers have that UFC fighters don't have is the Muhammad Ali Reform Act, or simply known as the Ali Act. So this federal act that was passed in 2000 protects boxers from some of the exploitation that was done by promoters/managers in the 1990s. This act actually officially recognized that boxing is one of the few sports where there is no league or one commissioner. So this act was essentially made to protect boxers in such a weird structured sport. Now this act does a number of different things, such as preventing promoters to be the same thing as managers, requiring promoters, sanctioning bodies, and everybody who is a part of a boxing event to disclose their financials and how much money they made. And most importantly, it requires that sanctioning bodies, or whoever ranks these boxers, to be independent of promoters. Now, this one is very important because...
Yes, I'm going to bring that back. So whoever ranks boxers, the sanctioning bodies, and the ones who rank boxers and give out titles have to be independent of the promoters. That's a huge problem if you want to start a TKO boxing league and have the TKO belt. So that is why they're toting around the Ring Magazine belt right now, like the belt that the fighters would be fighting for is Ring Magazine belt. But as you'll see, like Mauricio Suleiman was saying, Ring Magazine belt isn't a real belt. It's a magazine that has a belt, but it's not an actual sanctioning body. So this is a huge hurdle we're going to get into, but let's run that back again.
Thing as managers, requiring promoters, sanctioning bodies, and everybody who is a part of a boxing event to disclose their financials and how much money they made. And most importantly, it requires that sanctioning bodies, or whoever ranks these boxers, to be independent of promoters. Now, this one is very important because this prevents a situation like the UFC where fighters are dependent on the promotion to be ranked. In boxing, the belt organizations are responsible for ranking the fighters, and they're completely independent of the promoters, who are simply just promoting their fighters. So basically, fighters can move up the ranks independent of whatever promotion they're with. So because promotions are always trying to promote a belt holder or a top-ranked fighter, this kind of turns into a bidding war between the promotions. They're going to try to pay that boxer with the most money and outbid everybody else, which obviously is good for the boxer because they're going to get the most money out of all the promotions. Meanwhile, in the MMA, because the UFC is the top promotion and you're kind of dependent on the UFC to get yourself ranked or get a belt, there really is no bidding war. You're completely dependent on the UFC to get promoted and get ranked. Like, imagine if the Ali Act was extended to the MMA and the UFC. Let's take, for instance, Israel Adesanya, who is the champion at 185. Because he is the champ and he's well known and really high ranked, in this hypothetical, Bellator and ONE FC would be able to bid for Israel Adesanya's promotional rights. And basically this would turn into a bidding war where the UFC would have to pay Israel Adesanya more money, or he would leave their promotion for ONE FC or Bellator. So before I conclude this video, I wanted to mention the argument that boxing is an older sport.
All right. That's as much as I'm going to show on this video, but that's the main point. The Ali Act, as you can see, for all the protections that it gives the boxers, is a huge hurdle for Turki Alalshikh and for Dana White to climb, because it doesn't allow them to to be the promoter and do the rankings as well as be the sanctioning body and have the title. So they can't have a TKO belt, just be the TKO belt. That's why if you saw when Canelo was facing off with Scully, they had their TKO belt and they had the Ring Magazine belt. What they are going to attempt to do is say the Ring Magazine belt is the belt, its own belt, its own entity. Although Ring Magazine belt is owned by Turki Alalshikh, because Turki Alalshikh purchased Ring Magazine, and they're saying that Dana White is running TKO. So TKO is going to be TKO ran by Dana White, and then Ring Magazine is owned by Turki, but it's just owned by Turki. It's its own thing, and Turkey's going to try to get the Ring Magazine belt recognized as a title that the fighters can fight for, and you'll see them hold the Ring Magazine belt, which would quote unquote be the sanctioning body and the sanctioning belt, and then they'll have the TKO belt, which would just be kind of a decoration, an accessory that comes along with it, but really that's the league belt. So there's a lot of circumventing, and that's been happening with the Ali Act, because the Ali Act doesn't allow a promoter to be a fighter's manager, but we know that that's what's been taking place here. So take Matchroom, for example. Eddie Hearn is the promoter, but Eddie Hearn's the one with the stable of fighters. So Eddie Hearn tells which fighters are going to fight who. Eddie Hearn really has the final say so. If a fighter's manager says, I want my fighter to fight this fighter, it doesn't matter if the promoter's not on board with it. I'll give you an example. David Benavidez has a manager. David Benavidez's manager wants him to fight Canelo, but it doesn't matter if the promoter isn't on board with it. If the promoter really wanted Canelo to fight David Benavidez, the promoter is the one who fronts the money. So the promoter is the one who takes the loss. Whenever there's a fight, the promoter is the one who foots the bill and then recoups from the gate in the revenue generated for pay-per-view. And if they take a loss, then that's on the promoter. So if a promoter really wanted to fight, the promoter would invest in that fight. It's weird. They found a way to circumvent it, and they've been finding ways to circumvent the Ali Act. That's their way of attempting to do it. Will it be successful is the question. But we're going to take a look now at what Dana White said when he was asked about if he had to work with the promoters in boxing, because basically they're speaking in code. And what they're asking Dana White is, if you're not successful in getting around the Ali Act, would you be willing to work with these other promoters? And let's listen to what Dana White had to say. Let's bring this back a little more. All right, here it is.
You talk about the business of boxing. One of the biggest issues in it is that the guys who are in boxing can't get on and they never do deals. And it took Turkey to come along with money to basically make them work together, right? So with that respect, when you've come on to do this for Turkey, do you almost have to cut out these other guys because they're just going to make your job harder, right? If you're having to negotiate with every promoter in the sun, do you have to come out and eventually just get rid of these guys, lock them in Alcatraz, like Turkey said, and just do it yourself?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm more focused on, if you think about the UFC, when we bought the company, we had 3 letters, the old octagon, and 12 contracts. We had to build the thing from the ground up. I think that the sport of boxing is so broken, it needs to be built from the ground up again. And that's what I'm going to focus on doing. He's got some commitments over the next 18 months with a lot of guys and a lot of fights and a lot of different promoters. But I talk a lot about USA's Tuesday night fights. They put on like the best up and coming fighters all fought on that show and then became big pay-per-view stars. That's it's the same thing that happened with the UFC. We started on Spike TV, we built stars and they became pay-per-view stars. I want to do the same thing with boxing.
So is there a world where you're on stage with De La Hoya and Bob Arum one day, all playing nice?
I mean, let's hope not. I would never say never, but that is not what I plan to do.
You talk about
the UFC model again, talking about boxing's broken. Is boxing really broken? And that's where we run into a disagreement. Boxing is not broken. Boxing is what it is. It's a sport where the fighter is the brand. The fighter has options. It puts the fighter before company. It should. Don't get it twisted. The promoters have a lot of power. The promoters found ways to circumvent the Ali Act. It's out there. We get it. It's not really being enforced the way it should. But when you bring in an attempt to create a boxing league, to have your own belt, to go to war with the sanctioning bodies and do that thing, now you're ruffling a lot of feathers, and people are going to be looking to enforce the law. But there is one thing that they have on their side, Dana White and Turki Alalshikh. And it's the fact that Congress is the one who passed the Ali Act. And if they get enough votes, Congress can overturn the Ali Act. And the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, just so happens to be a very good friend of Dana White's. And Republicans are the majority in Congress. Now, here's the thing. You're going to have to convince Republicans that repealing the Ali Act is a good thing. And Republicans are free thinkers, and they're going to look at this, and you can't just get them to vote in unison, because no, they're really going to look at it. They're really going to assess it. And there may be a lot of Republicans, even if they're told that, they feel like you should repeal the act, who may go against it. You never know how the Republicans are going to vote, because they don't just align and just get along, go along. They're going to actually look at the issue and vote how they feel on the issue. So there's no guarantee that they can repeal this act in the sport of boxing, which would really create mayhem. But we're just going to take a look at Dana White's relationship with the president of the United States, who is a Republican and who also has Congress, which is a majority Republican. So there is a possibility that that could be something that goes to the floor and has to have a vote to see if they want to overturn the Ali Act.
To the people who work for them. Loyalty is a prerequisite for an honorable life, and Dana White has demonstrated it to the people around him. He's also loyal to his friends, even if his friends turn out to be the most controversial people in the world. And Dana White is friends with Donald Trump. They've been friends for decades. And as a result of that, he spoke when Trump asked him at the Republican National Convention in 2016. Took a lot of heat for that, but he didn't care. He's not afraid. That maybe is the most obvious point about Dana White. He's just not afraid. Maybe because he doesn't work at some dumb nonprofit or the Washington Post. He's in a very violent sport. In any case, he was not afraid to tell us about his relationship with Trump, and it was worth hearing. Here's part of it.
All right. I just want to highlight that this video is being shown as fair use. This is a reaction to what is being shown in the video. I'm not showing the video to show the video or to take the right to the video. No, I'm reacting to what is said in this video. And as you see, Dana White has been good friends with Trump. He's been loyal to Trump through the ups and the downs, the good and the bad. Even when he's taken heat for supporting Donald Trump, you see that he's had his back. And so that goes a long way. Like loyalty begets loyalty when you're in that arena. We'll listen to what Dana White had to say about his relationship with Donald Trump.
So I talked to Trump yesterday about you, and he described you as the only essential person in all American sports. He said you could take key people out of any sport and the sport would continue. If Dana White left UFC, there couldn't be UFC. Now, I don't know what you think of that assessment, but it did make me wonder, how long you're the same age as I am, 53. How long are you going to do this?
Well, I love him and I appreciate that. And hopefully I've built a business over the last 22 years that no matter who comes and goes will last and continue to grow. I also know for a fact that when I do leave, the right person needs to be in place to take over, because there is a formula to this business. Many other people have tried it. Many people are trying it right now as we speak and have not been successful. And I know why they haven't been successful. I know exactly why they haven't been successful. And when I watch them, running their businesses, I just shake my head and go, yeah. So hopefully when I do decide to leave, which isn't going to be anytime soon, because I still love what I'm doing, I'm still as passionate about it as I was day one, I have the right people in place. Plus, I've built a phenomenal team here. Phenomenal team. You know, no one guy just does anything. You know, you need a really great team to surround yourself with, and I've done that, and that's why, you know, there's no way that I was going to let any of these people leave when COVID hit.
All right, now there it is. You heard from Tucker Carlson. He said Tucker Carlson. He said that the president said Dana's so important to UFC that if he left, UFC wouldn't be successful. That's really him showing how highly he thinks of Dana White. Now, remember, the first reason is the Ali Act. There's so many things in the Ali Act that protect the fighters from the belt and the sanctioning body and the promotion company can't be the same. And that's going to be a major hurdle. In addition to the promoter can't be the manager. So if you fight in a league, then that's really the promoter being the manager. The league is acting as your promoter and your manager. They're telling you who you need to fight. They're setting your purse. They're doing the negotiating with themselves, which is a conflict of interest. So there goes another major hurdle. Now, one thing that, like I said, that could erase all of this is if it gets repealed. And again, Dana White does have a good relationship with the president, but that doesn't mean that if they put a vote to Congress, that all the other Republicans in Congress, although they have the majority, are going to vote to repeal and overturn the Ali Act. But that's just one hurdle. The second major hurdle is that this league will create a war with the sanctioning bodies. Most importantly, the WBC, and the WBC has a lot of pull in boxing. It was the first major championship in the sport of boxing, and a lot of fighters dream of holding that green belt. And so even if you start a league and you think that you're going to do all these things, right? There's some fighters who will stay loyal to the WBC and still want the WBC belt. And most importantly, there are going to be fighters who know about what I just showed you when it comes to the UFC. In 2021, their fighters were only making 16% of the revenue that they generated, and that's their superstars. At the max, they're superstars. Their superstars were making a fraction of what events generated. And as a boxer, if you're a superstar boxer, you're your own entity. Right now, Turkey is throwing a lot of money at people, but that's not as a part of this TKO league. That was just as a part of them going to fight at Riyadh season. But who would sign to a league knowing that you're basically signing your rights to be your own boss away? That's going to be a tough sell. But in addition to that being a tough sell, telling people to forget about their dreams of holding that green WBC belt and becoming the champion they saw Muhammad Ali was, the champion that they saw Floyd Money Mayweather was, the champion they saw that Canelo was. And speaking of Canelo, this is Canelo at his press conference, and he asked Turkey, and you see Turkey standing with the that would be the TKO belt, and you see him standing with the Ring Magazine belt. He's going to ask Turkey if he can bring the WBC belt so he can wear it because that's the belt he loves. And Turkey says no. And although he said no, if you put a lie detector test on Canelo Alvarez and said, what belt do you love the most? There's no doubt it's going to be the WBC belt. But let's take a look. All right, let me mute this because I don't want my video getting flagged because of the song in the background. All right, now watch. Canelo looks at Turkey and says, can I get the WBC belt? He's pointing at it, and Turkey says, no WBC. So Canelo says no, and he just tells them, all right, take the belt away. And he doesn't pose with the WBC belt. That's problematic. And Mauricio Suleiman, the president of the WBC, spoke about what happened in Turkey not allowing Canelo Alvarez to take a picture with the WBC belt. And here's what he had to say. This video appears courtesy of IFL TV. Subscribe to IFL TV for some of the best interviews in the sport of boxing.
What is that? The Ring Magazine is a magazine. I don't know why media and champions and promoters give any credit to a Ring Magazine belt. which only threatens the credibility of the sport. I am very upset because they just declared a few days ago that the rankings of the organizations are corrupt. And if you touch my WBC, I'm going to fight back. I don't care about the Ring magazine because they are a business. They make money. They are biased. And that is not boxing. Boxing is what you see here. The world of boxing united to make boxing better and safer. A paper magazine awarding a belt has no meaning. Of course, fighters like it because it gives them positive news. But look at this decision, completely arbitrarily. I hope that this understand and stop media giving any value to a magazine belt.
And Mauricio Suleiman is right. Ring magazine is just a magazine, and they award a belt. They're not an actual sanctioning body. They don't submit the criteria for how they do their rankings. They haven't filed to be an official organization. I don't know if that's in the works, but again, they're just a magazine. They don't have like an actual belt. They're not an actual sanctioning body, and they're not a recognized sanctioning body. Just like you have the IBO, they have a belt, but they're not recognized as one of the titles that you need to become undisputed. Ring magazine is a magazine. It's a very popular magazine. Over 100 years, it has its place. It's legendary, but again, its belt isn't required for you to be undisputed. You can be undisputed without the Ring magazine belt. And again, the reason why they're placing so much emphasis on this Ring magazine belt is because they're going to try to attempt to get it recognized. And attempt to get it recognized so that they can circumvent the Ali Act in boxing. Just like promoters really are the promoters and the managers in the end, but to circumvent, they'll let a fighter get a manager, and the manager will beg for their fighters to get a title shot, and the promoter will say, oh, not right now, there's no money for it or whatever. And as long as the promoter is putting up the money and taking the losses, the promoter is going to have the final say. And the networks also play a role in that because they work with the promoter, and they'll say, we don't want that fight. We're not going to pay for that fight. It's a big deal. But in the end, for Turki Alalshikh and for Dana White, they're going to go to war with the sanctioning bodies. There are 4 of them. And they're not just going to lay down and allow you to make their belts irrelevant. And again, if you're a league and you start a league, and you want the perception that the best fighters fight in your league and your belt's the real belt, because remember, that's what he was starting already. If you're ranked in the top 5, you're already one of the best fighters in the world in our league. If you can make the top 5 in our league, you're already one of the best fighters in the world because the best fight the best. So you don't need no letters in front of your belt and whatever. You just make top 5. You're one of the best. They're already starting the mind games on the people. They're already starting the promotion. They're already starting the branding. They're already starting to. So what do you think is going to happen if people can't get into the top 5 in your league, but there's 4 belts out there, and those belts have more history, more credibility than what you're doing right now? People are going to want to go and get those belts. And fighters have been showing their loyalty to the WBC. I'm going to show you right now. So here are some images of fighters who are in support of the WBC. And they're making it known that they're not getting rid of their WBC belt. You can see Mario Barrios. You see Shocky Foster, Carlos Adames, Carlos Adames, and Stephen Fulton. They took pictures and they're putting it up. They're showing their support for the WBC. I saw Fundora, I think Gabrielle Fundora. She posted a picture showing her loyalty and support for the WBC. A lot of these fighters are not going to part ways with their WBC title. Even Canelo loves his WBC title. Turkey's paying him money right now. He's going to get his bag. Once that deal is done, Canelo's going to be like walking around with his WBC title. So, one, the first major hurdle is the Ali Act. Two, the second major hurdle is the war with the sanctioning bodies. A lot of these fighters love these sanctioning bodies, and they all have a coveted title that they fell in love with since a kid that they always dreamed of having, and it wasn't this belt in this league. In addition to the fact that the Ring Magazine belt really isn't an official belt, and it doesn't meet the criteria, so I don't know how they plan on going about that, and if they will even be successful in getting that belt recognized. But one thing we know under the Ali Act in the sport of boxing is the promoter cannot be a part of the ranking system with the sanctioning body. So as long as TKO is its own boxing league and it's the promoter and it's the manager, which is already a conflict of interest. But let's just say for the fact that it's a part of this league where it's the promoter, they can't be involved in ranking the fighters and involved in the title that the fighters would be holding. So how do you make that happen as a part of a boxing league without violating the Ali Act? And then again, you already have Mauricio Suleiman pointing that out. You're not a real belt. It's a cute little trophy to walk around with. You know, it's a cute little accessory, but at the end of the day, it's all right, but it's not real, is what Mauricio Suleiman is saying. So you got that as an issue. So the first two issues are, one, the Ali Act prevents all of this from happening. It's made to prevent leagues from taking place. It's made to prevent monopolies like UFC. And then two, the war with the sanctioning bodies, in which they don't have a belt that's a part of the original sanctioning bodies. And the sanctioning bodies are not going to lay down. They're going to fight. So not only do you have promoters who would want to fight back, but you have sanctioning bodies who would want to fight back. It's adding up to, you know, a problem. And you can save money, but you can only throw so much money at this. And the third reason, and the last reason I'm going to get into why this league will fail, is because unlike MMA, boxing is one discipline, and it's really striking. MMA, there are multiple disciplines. So when you think one fighter is great at something, there's another fighter, and it's like, oh, well, would this fighter's success in these multiple disciplines be able to come this fighter's striking ability? When it comes to boxing, it's just boxing. It's just the sweet science. And we've seen already when Errol Spence was with PBC and when Terrence Bud Crawford was with Top Rank. And although they never fought each other, it took years for them to fight each other. You had people who just ran with Spence because they like Spence and they're going to pay to see Spence fight. And then you got people who were like, Terrence Bud Crawford's the best. We can see he's the best. He's the best pound for pound. Terrence wasn't fighting names that were as notable as the guys who Errol Spence was fighting. But a lot of people, I'll admit I wasn't one of them. I picked Spence to beat Terrence Bud Crawford. But there were a lot of people who were steadfast on the fact that Terrence Bud Crawford was the best. And not only the best, but the best pound for pound because the skills were noticeable. And I just want to add a caveat. The Errol Spence who I thought would beat Terrence Crawford was not the Errol Spence who stepped in the ring with him. And I'm not making any excuses. I don't do that. What I'm saying is I picked Errol back when they first had that confrontation face to face, when you know they had that friendly banter, and a lot of things happened after that. And I done talked so much trash. I couldn't pull out of being Team Errol. But salute to Crawford. He's a great fighter. But that just proves a point. Errol Spence was actually not as good as Terrence Bud Crawford because you got to go off of the results, but he was actually more lucrative than Terrence Bud Crawford because people wanted to see him fight more, and he generated more money until they fought each other and Terrence Bud Crawford schooled him. Then you have Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua was another debate. Anthony Joshua was fighting real heavyweights, unifying titles, fighting the best competition. But because Deontay Wilder was going out there getting one-punch knockouts and devastating highlight reel knockouts, although his skill never really existed and all he had was a big right hand and everything else was sloppy as hell, he still had people who believed he was the best, and he still had people who believed he would beat Anthony Joshua, and there's still people who believe that to this day. So I say all that to say it doesn't really matter if you have the best fighter. The only thing that matters is who the public wants to see. And you see that now with Gervonta Davis. There are a lot of guys out there who have taken on the best in their division, who fought the best in their division, but they don't sell pay-per-views like Gervonta Tank Davis. And that's what UFC, I'm not UFC, but that's what Dana White and Turki Alalshikh keep missing. They keep saying, oh, we want to see the best fight the best, and the best are going to fight the best. You can make the best fight the best all you want to. It's not going to translate into numbers. Jake Paul doesn't fight the best. In fact, Jake Paul fights guys who were the best 10 years ago. He fought Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson wasn't champion for 30 years. He still fought Mike Tyson and made more money and generated more interest in his fight with Mike Tyson than any event that Turki Alalshikh has put on since he's been putting on the best versus the best. The problem is they don't understand how boxing works. And if you know how boxing works, making the best fight the best isn't going to translate into money all the time. And that is where this will fail. Artur Beterbiev versus Bivol was the best fight in the best. I guarantee you. It didn't do as well as some other fights. It didn't do as well as Gervonta Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia. And so even if you take TKO and you make it a boxing league, the only thing that will make TKO boxing league work is if they overpay fighters. They have to keep putting out these astronomical numbers that the promoters can't match. And as long as they do that, the promoters will hand them the fighters themselves because they're going to get a percentage of it, which is what's happening right now with Ryan Garcia versus Roley. And they'll give you their fighters as long as you want to keep overpaying. We saw this with Eddie Hearn. When Eddie Hearn first got in the market with the Zone, he overpaid fighters and did all that. He thought he was going to take the U.S. market out. And what ended up happening? Once he ran out of money, people went with the ones they rock with anyway. They're missing that. And so to me, no fighter is going to sign to become property of a league, especially if you're a superstar. Look at the pay disparities between the superstars in boxing and the superstars in UFC. Well, who would want to sign to be a part of that? And fighters who actually have lawyers and people around them who are educated, they're going to be like, why would you want to sign this slave deal when you can go out and be your own brand? You can get your own sponsorships and be entitled to the money that you get instead of having them tell you who you're sponsored by and them getting the majority of the money. You can get at least 40% of the revenue you generate instead of 16%. This is what I'm saying to you. There are intelligent people out there. And then one of the funny things I saw, someone wrote in a comment like, oh, Dana White knows how the business work. You think you know how the business work? I know how the business work. I'm the guy people, I might get to it. I guarantee you this. You haven't seen more contracts than me. You haven't declined or approved of more contracts than me. So regardless of what you think of whatever you don't know, one. And two, everything I'm saying to you is just realistic facts, obvious. If you know, it's out there. Go look it up for yourself. Do the own research. But again, they're going to have a problem because boxing is not like mixed martial arts. People see the fighter fight the same discipline, striking, boxing, Marcus of Queensberry rules. They see it and then they fall in love with the fighter they like. Tank got fanboys you wouldn't believe. My man Tank got people who are out here defending what happened with Lamont Roach. No, this man took a knee. No, they still come out. They don't care. That's what you get. Earl Spence still got people like, when you coming back, champ? I know you can get Terrence Bud Crawford. It's crazy. The boxing fan is so delusional. You think the best fighting the best is going to matter? That's what y'all don't understand. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And this is what TKO is missing. This is what Turki Alalshikh is missing. Turki been putting on the best, fighting the best, but he still hasn't topped Jake Paul yet. That's a fact. It's Jake Paul did those numbers not because Mike Tyson was Iron Mike of the prime, and Jake Paul's not even ranked. What would Jake Paul rank realistically? What is he, cruiserweight? What would Jake Paul realistically rank in the cruiserweight division? Close to dead last. But he's one of the highest paid boxers in the game. They don't understand how this works. In their league, it would be in big trouble. One, there's a lot of major hurdles implemented by the Ali Act. But in addition to that, boxing isn't like the UFC. You don't need a farm to create a star. Stars just rise. Stars just create themselves. And it's always been that way. It will always be that way. And you may not have that guy in your league. And even if you had that guy in your league, it doesn't matter. Look at TC. Look at AJ when he was fighting everyone. Then Usyk didn't come out of nowhere and took all the... It's like boxing is a completely different beast. So for those reasons, I don't think that the league will succeed. And for those three reasons, the league is most likely to fail. Just to recap, one, the Ali Act. There's a lot of hurdles they have to overcome with the Ali Act. And then two, the war with the sanctioning bodies. They don't have a belt that meets the requirement to be a sanctioning body within the sport of boxing. So to just completely try to eliminate the sanctioning bodies and to show your true colors the way they did, when they did, and how they played their hand, I think it's going to be problematic, and it may be a hurdle that they can't overcome. And lastly, boxing is one discipline. And people see the fighter they like, they're going to stick with the fighter they like, regardless of the promotional company or the quote-unquote league. Whether the fighters with Matchroom, PBC, Top Rank, or with TKO, people gravitate to the fighters they like, who fight the way they like, and who have the skill that they believe is the best. Every fighter has their own fanboy. Take Shakur fanboys, they're going to be with him regardless of where he was fighting. TC fanboys were going to be with him regardless of where he was fighting. Deontay Wilder fanboys were going to be with him regardless of where he was fighting, what league he was fighting, what promoter he was fighting for. None of that matters. The best fighting the best, you think in your mind who you think the best is. To the fanboys, the best is the guy who they like. And that's going to make it difficult. Anyways, that's what I have to say about this. Again, I'm not rooting against them. It's not my hope. I'm just pointing out some facts as to why I think it's going to be very difficult for this league to be successful. But as I'm sure you will, let me know in the comment section. I'm going to do my best to get to the comments. Again, I can't get to every comment, but I appreciate the fact that you left a comment and you joined in the discussion. So I really appreciate that. And also like the video. When you like the video, it helps circulate the video to other people. It helps the algorithm, and it helps get the video out there. I appreciate that. And if you can't listen to the video, but you really want to catch the content, because really all I'm doing is recording a podcast live on video. You can listen to the podcast, available on all major streaming services. I appreciate those who listen to the podcast. The podcast does really great numbers, by the way. So thank you for all your support. I appreciate it. And until the next video, I am out. Much love and respect. Catch you soon. I'm out. Peace.